My speech is going to be on Syria, a country of 22 million people in the middle of the Middle East. As you can see, it's in a very friendly neighbourhood. My speech is going to have three parts. First is going to be giving the background, the history, then what's happening at the moment, and then what can be done about this. Starting with the history, the Romans ran Syria. I can see Tom's very excited about that. One of the emperors came from, Philip the Arab, and under the Romans it became Christian, and eventually the Romans became the Byzantines, and the last bit of trivia, the last non-European pope was a Syrian. Eventually, in the 630s, the Arabs conquered the region, and brought Islam to the region. This was right after Muhammad's death, and so that's what happened there. And for the next very long time, it was ruled by Muslims. Eventually, it changed dynasties, and for a very brief time, the Mongols occupied it. In fact, they allied with the French and the English at various times, the Crusader states. But the only real Mongols never leave an impression when they conquer somewhere. The only real point of that is these guys, the French, who keep on coming up. And then the Ottomans come. The Ottomans stay for a long time. They don't leave until 1918. And well, they don't. Yes, and so they're Muslim. They're the caliphs. And and apart from sort of a 3-year spell where sort of the greatest man ever conquered between 1798 and 1801. But as Muslims, they to some degree oppressed the Christians in Syria and throughout the Ottoman Empire, and the Russians feel they have an obligation to protect the Orthodox citizens of the Ottoman Empire. Eventually, in the First World War, both the Russian and Ottoman empires collapse, and the French take over. And so, in 1920, after the Sykes-Picot Treaty, I pronounced that very badly, the French take power in 1920 and stay around until 1936. They give some kind of power to the Syrians, but retain some power over military affairs till 1946, when there comes the Syrian Republic. Remember that flag? The Syrian Republic is very unstable, continual coups and things like that. Just very unstable, very bad. They run, and eventually there's a party called the Ba'ath Party. It's the Arab National Socialists, quite similar to the German kind, very unpleasant people. Saddam Hussein was part of the Iraqi branch of the Ba'ath Party. They take power in the early 60s, and they're to some degree aligned with the Soviet Union. They let the Soviets build a base at Tartus, which they still have, which the Russians still have, and nasty people, and they support NASA. They support NASA, and for 3 years, in fact, well, slightly earlier, Egypt and Syria joined as one country. And they support the Soviets in the Cold War, and that kind of, so they don't like the Jordanian king. On the side, and they also support the PLO. The PLO, who are the Palestinian Liberation Organization, pro-Soviet, anti the Jordanian government, and so as a terrorist group. So they hijack 4 planes, take them to an abandoned British RAF base, and let all the people off, which is a change for terrorists, and blow up planes. That annoys the Jordanian government a lot, because PLO are doing things in their country, and so they decide to kill the PLO and kill about 3,000 of them. That upsets the Syrians, who are pro-PLO, so they send an army in, but they're too scared to put their air force in because the Israelis might intervene. So the Jordanian air force defeats the Syrian column, goes in, completely destroys the Palestinian PLO forces there. In fact, some PLO flee to Israel because they'd rather be imprisoned in Israel than killed by the Jordanians. And that makes the president of Syria very unpopular. So his Ba'ath defense minister decides to take power in 1970. Mr. Hafez al-Assad, massive forehead. He is an Alawite and a deeply, deeply nasty man. Eventually, people don't like him, so the Muslim Brotherhood, as you do in a single-party dictatorship, just starts assassinating people and really piss him off, up until 79, where they really, really start pissing him off and kill people and things like that. And eventually, in 1982, they seized control of a town called Hama. And that really, really pisses off Hafez. And so what he decides to do is to take the town. And he gets his brother, and his brother decides to basically wipe out the town, kill the entire population. Between 10 and 40,000 people are killed. And eventually he has two sons, Basil. Basil is driving along with in his Mercedes one day and crashes into something and dies. So the loser son, to put it, Bashar is recalled from an ophthalmology course in London. Strange. And is the heir to the throne. Eventually, Hafez dies. There's his funeral. And suddenly and amazingly, the Syrian parliament decides to drop the age for presidency from 40 to 34, which is coincidentally the age of Bashar. So he becomes the president of Syria. He sets up something called the Damascus Spring. He frees up a few prisoners, but it's pretty impressive on the whole. Syria as a whole is 60% of the population are Sunni Arabs, 11% Alawite, 10% Christian, other groups, and then there are Kurds in the north. So that's the end of the first part. The second part is the Arab Spring. A Tunisian fruit seller is selling his fruit when he gets his weighing scales, taken away from him, and perhaps gets slapped by the policewoman who takes them away. He gets very annoyed and very upset, especially when they don't give back to him. He gets so annoyed, so upset, that he decides to set himself on fire. And the people think that's the sign of how corrupt the Tunisian regime is, so they riot, protest, and bring down the Tunisian regime. That's the end of Tunisia. Same thing can happen in Egypt, same thing eventually happens in Libya after a prolonged civil war, and Syrian protests start. That's a very big one, and being a dictator, Assad does not like people protesting. So he decides the traditional dictator thing, shoot them. And eventually, but of course some of the Sunni Arab soldiers decide, I don't want to shoot my own people. And so, and they decide, we're defecting, we're joining the Free Syrian Army, we're setting it up, and we're fighting this guy. And so eventually, you get a three-way civil war. On one side is the Assad gang. He's backed by Hezbollah, which is a Shia terrorist group in Lebanon, which has a lot of power. The Iranians, who are Shia, which is very similar to Alawite, which is Hafez's group, and the Russians, who both want to protect their small base in Tartus, which they have had since Soviet times, and also want to have the idea of a protector of the Orthodox Christians. And the Orthodox Christians, Assad likes to proclaim himself the protector of the Orthodox Christians, although what their view on that is open to question. Mainly Alawite are his supporters, although other minorities do support him to some degree. On the other side is the FSA. The FSA is formed by defectors, so it has vast of tanks and things like that. It is mainly Sunni, and it has lots of backers. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Libya, all of the Arab League, but 3 people. And what do you look? Also, the nice people of Al-Qaeda, the Turks, and the West, including the French. So what do you? The West are giving the FSA radio equipment. Probably much more dangerous stuff is given by these people, although they're not very generous. And Al-Qaeda is providing some support to their I can't pronounce it, who are a sort of Al-Qaeda affiliated group in Syria. And the FSA's, most of their support comes from Sunnis, but they aim to be across the country, and their leading figure of the Syrian opposition is actually now a Christian, although that's not really relevant, useful token. And then there are the Kurds. The Kurds are sort of powerless minority throughout the region. There are 50 million in Turkey, and they've been waging a war with the Turkish government since forever, basically, since the 1920s. There are also some in Iraq who basically have their own independent country, but not officially, and Iran, not much happens in Iran. And there is a group called the PYD, which is the group in Syria, which is very, very closely to the Turkish group, PKK, which the Turks absolutely hate, or did until very recently. Today. They're trying some kind of treaty. But, so the PYD basically wants autonomy. It's not that aggressive, but the Syrian army has kind of retreated and the PYD has taken over because the Syrian army of Assad doesn't want to give them the Kurds power, but it's got bigger fish to fry, so it retreats. And this is the stalemate we're in now. It's been going on for quite a while. Damascus, the capital, is sort of in between, battle between the forces, neither really control it. Same with Aleppo, which is the biggest city, and the commercial capital. Homs and Ham are also quite complicated, and of course there are the Kurds controlling the northeast. The result of the war is 70,000 dead, 1 million refugees in foreign countries, and we, as of confirmed on my Twitter feed a few hours ago, by the Americans, chemical weapons, sarin has been used by the Syrian government. And of course, Al-Qaeda has gained support. Can this disaster be stopped? The answer to that is simple. Yes. It's quite easy. What do you do? The Turks are desperate to stop it. Most of the Arab League, well-armed Arab League, is desperate to stop it. And the only people who want to continually support the Assad regime are a few Iranian mercenaries and Hezbollah, who can easily be defeated. So with a tiny bit of firepower, the West could quite easily defeat the Assad's army, defeat his tank forces, and it would quickly collapse because he has very little support in the country. And of course, if they were supported by the West, then Al-Qaeda would of course not get support and would no longer pose a threat. In the future, Syria has to have a future state, has to be democratic. And this is what I think a future Syria needs. It needs federalism. It needs federalism or autonomy for the Kurds, because they have been crying out for it. And in Iraq, they've been happy with some degree of autonomy. It needs a parliamentary system, just in general, everywhere works far better with a parliamentary system, especially a divided country like Syria. It needs guarantees for the minorities, because they don't want to, their great fear is being oppressed by the Sunni Arab majority. And so, I mean, in Egypt they have a system where various positions resolve for different people. That could be a good, for different people, different ethnic minorities or religious minorities. That could be the solution here, or there could be reserved seats in parliament, like they do in various countries, including New Zealand, strangely enough. And of course, some of the Kurds don't get citizenship. That needs to be reversed because they will always feel dispossessed if they're not citizens, and that's also true of Palestinians. Of course, you can't have a democracy without democracy. So, and that's what most of these people are fighting for, or at least some of them are. And in a Sunni Arab country, it's been shown that that means ruled by the Muslim Brotherhood. If you look at Egypt, if you look at Tunisia, the Muslim Brotherhood will always win a free and fair election. And to some degree, you need amnesties, because otherwise they'll think that it's just going to be taken out on the otherwise. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, so you mentioned like kind of intervention by the West and the Arabs. Given that it's taken a bloody long time to intervene in the likes of Iraq and Afghanistan, and we are still intervening, do you really think that's kind of a feasible approach?
Well, as long as we don't use ground troops, I don't think that there's any real risk. So, I mean, there's no risk of being bogged down if you have no reason to be bogged down. And there is also the FSA, which is willing to take that. So we don't need our own troops.
I've been to Turkey a few times, like entirely as a vacation kind of thing, a holiday, that kind of thing. And I'm more than fully aware of the massive divide between the Turks and the Kurds. Like, you call a Turk a Kurd, that's really bad. You call a Kurd a Turk, that's really bad, kind of thing. What I want to know is, which I still don't understand after I've been there so many times, is what is the fundamental difference between the Kurds and everyone else? Why is it? Cause I originally thought it was just between the Turks and Eastern Turkey, kind of thing. But now it turns out that there is a difference, from what you said, between the Kurds and quite a significant, I say significant, I mean, you know, considering it's on the border, a significant amount of Eastern European and Asian kind of countries. What is the main difference going on there? Why are they so much at war with each other?
Well, I mean, the main thing is the Kurds speak Kurdish, the Arabs speak Arabic, and the Turks speak Turkish. I mean, there's also some cultural differences. I mean, they celebrate different festivals.
But what's the? Do you know what the fundamental thing that makes them want to hate? What is the original? You know, like Montague Capulet. What is the thing going on there that makes them want to hate each other?
Well, the Kurds don't have a state, and most linguistic groups want to have a state and are willing to kill people to have a state. That's true everywhere in the world.
But why are they different from the Turks? Why can't they just be like a separate part of a collective, in the same way that we have the Welsh are different to the English, different to the Scots, but we're still a United Kingdom, we're still Great Britain?
Well, that's because we all speak English pretty well.
Yeah. So what is the difference between?
Well, the Kurds speak Kurdish.
Okay, fair enough. But it's still like a branch off and very similar kind of thing.
I mean, people, in lots of
the
places,
Welsh speak Welsh, the Scottish speak Gaelic, right? Why is it that?
Well, they don't. If they did, then.
Okay, well, no, they originally spoke Gaelic. You know, I don't mean specifically that they like, you know, wake up in the morning that all they're speaking is Gaelic. But
there would be a problem if they still spoke Gaelic, then they want, and while they were speaking Gaelic, they were regularly starting wars and trying to get independence.
But the Scots want their independence, as the Welsh. No, I'm just intrigued because obviously I say obviously now. I just go there myself and I just want to I'm trying to understand myself what's going on, because I did actually, there was this one case where I was in Turkey and I was talking to this small group of people who were like, you know, native Turkish kind of thing, and I started talking about some of my friends who were Kurdish, who lived in the same town and everything, and they refused to speak to each other. I brought up the subject and they were like, oh, my mates, and so they're actually Kurdish, and it was like, no, I don't want to talk about them, no, I don't like them, kind of thing. I was just wondering what the basic, animosity between them was.
In lots of places you look at, it's basically linguistic. Well, linguistic, cultural. I mean, there are cultural differences, but it comes back to language. If you look at throughout Eastern Europe, the difference is linguistic.
Can I just ask, why did you choose this subject?
Just found it interesting. Yeah, no real reason. I just interested in the Middle East.
It's one of the few Eastern countries not banned from.
Okay, for example, you said that you kind of made some proposals what we should do in order to kind of stop it. Don't you think that with the other war we would create some more mess there?
Well, we would end the war. That's the whole point, is we could end the war very quickly.
No, but with aggression, with fight, we would create another fight.
Well, we would end the fight. That's the whole
Like
point.
we ended the war in Iraq.
Well, that's different because that's committed to ground troops. That was committed to ground troops.
So, what's your suggestion?
Well, I was suggesting we
I already asked that.
air power.
Yeah, but I didn't understand the answer.
Oh, right.
Sorry. This is probably me being like really
They
stupid.
use
I don't understand it.
They use the planes to make the enemy go boom.
Oh, deflame!
They go boom.
Yes, if you use planes, then you don't have to send in men, other people who get bogged down.
So, are the majority of the population, like, do they want to change the regime because of the current ones being oppressive, or is it just because the leadership is ethnic minority and they just want their own race, at the top?
Well, a bit of both. They can't be. The only reason a minority is in power is because it's oppressive. But I mean, there are plenty of Alawites who don't like the regime, and there are a few Sunnis who do like it.
Right.
But part of the reason is
I was just looking at the slides you had about the opposition we have to the war. One thing I think you may have missed out is Russia, because they are very solidly behind. Well, but it was on when you said the potential consequences and at the front. You kind of talked about there being a few people with guns and stuff, but Russia would arguably be a massive roadblock to us doing anything because they've got a veto in the Security Council. If we were to, sorry, I'm going to finish my question. If you were to intervene, we being the UK, were to intervene in Syria, what do you think the consequences would be as regards to Russia's opposition to our such action? How would you deal with it?
They get very angry and do nothing, as they usually do. I mean, they wouldn't dare commit troops or anything like that. So I don't think they're going to cause a great deal of problems apart from write some angry letters.
Getting rid of the outside kid really
Sorry,
solve.
in the interest of time, I'm going to have to make that the last question.
Right.
Maybe you can ask one of the
So
other
that's
section.
would destroying the outside kid really end the war? There are two other factions that are still around. So if you kill one clique, the other two will go at each other.
Well, no, because if you have federal structure, which is pretty well what they want, then they'd be happy. They'd happily put down the guns if they are promised some degree of federalism or autonomy. That's all they want.